There is a moment after 45 when old decisions begin to feel different. Not wrong, not dramatic, just heavier. You can wake up with a quiet ache that has no clear event attached to it. You start remembering choices you made 20 or 30 years ago, and they no longer look like simple steps in a long road ahead, because the road ahead no longer feels endless. It feels measured. It feels visible. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything inside. It is not about regret alone. It is about perspective. In your 30s, time felt like an open field, wide and forgiving, where even a mistake could be corrected by speed and effort, and every decision seemed adjustable because there was always more life waiting in front of you. At 45, the field becomes a landscape. You can see its edges. Why does it hurt now when it did not hurt before? In your 30s, decisions were mostly about expansion, about building, about proving, about moving forward fast enough to secure a future that still felt abstract and distant. Now the future has weight. Now it has a number. You notice how many years have passed since certain crossroads, and instead of thinking, I can still redo this, you think, that door may never open again. And that realization lands in the chest with surprising force. It can feel like loss. Even if nothing is objectively wrong, this does not mean something is broken in you. It means your sense of time has changed. After 45, the brain naturally becomes more sensitive to finiteness because lived experience accumulates evidence that life is not endless, and this awareness quietly reorganizes how memory works. Memories gain sharper contrast. Old choices gain emotional color. A career decision that once felt practical can now feel personal, because you measure it not against ambition, but against the years it consumed. A relationship you left behind may resurface, not because you want it back, but because you now understand what it truly cost. Understanding deepens, and depth can ache. Earlier, you were oriented toward possibility. Now, you are oriented toward meaning. That is a profound psychological shift. It is also a healthy one. When time feels unlimited, decisions are experiments. When time feels limited, decisions become chapters. You are no longer asking, what can I try next? You are asking, what did this chapter shape in me? That question carries weight. The pain that appears after 45 is often not about the choice itself, but about the finality that seems to surround it, because you begin to see that some paths were mutually exclusive, and that choosing one quietly closed another forever. That awareness was always true, but now you can feel it. There is also a biological layer to this shift. Energy changes, recovery takes longer, risk tolerance narrows. When the body signals limits more clearly, the mind listens differently, and past decisions that once seemed bold or necessary can now look costly because you no longer feel invincible enough to imagine repeating them. You are not weaker, you are more precise. This precision sharpens memory. It sharpens evaluation. It sharpens emotion. Sometimes the hurt is connected to identity. You remember who you thought you would become, and you compare that imagined version with the man you are today, and the distance between those two figures can feel uncomfortable in a way that surprises you. That comparison was always possible, but earlier it felt theoretical. Now it feels embodied. You can look at your life and see its structure, its patterns, its limits, and with that clarity comes a kind of mourning. Not necessarily for mistakes, but for unrealized versions of yourself that existed only as potential, and now clearly will not exist in reality. This is not failure, it is maturation. After 45, time is no longer abstract currency. It is personal history. When you think about a decision from your 20s, you are not just reviewing a moment, you are reviewing decades that unfolded from it, and you feel the accumulated weight of every consequence that followed, visible and invisible. That weight can feel like pressure, but it is also evidence of a life lived. There is another reason the past becomes more emotionally charged. At this stage, many men reach relative stability. The rush slows down, the external noise decreases, and in that quieter space, unresolved feelings finally have room to surface, because there is no longer constant motion to keep them submerged beneath deadlines, ambitions, and responsibilities. Silence amplifies memory. Memory amplifies emotion. You may interpret this as regret, but often it is integration. Earlier, you had no time to process fully. You were busy surviving and building. Now your inner system begins to assemble the narrative of your life. And during that assembly process, certain decisions light up with new intensity because they shaped entire decades, and your mind wants to understand them in a deeper way. Understanding is not accusation, it is coherence. The hurt you feel can be the mind's attempt to reconcile who you were with who you are, because those two versions are no longer in competition, they are in conversation. That conversation can be uncomfortable, but it is honest. There is also the simple mathematics of life. At 25, a 10-year period feels vast. At 45, 10 years feels immediate. So when you look back at a choice that led to 10 or 15 years of a certain direction, you feel it proportionally, because you intuitively understand that another 10 or 15 years represents a significant portion of what remains ahead. Proportion changes perception. Perception changes emotion. This is why old decisions start to sting. Not because they suddenly became wrong, but because their scale became visible. Visibility can be painful. It can also be grounding. When you clearly see that a path shaped you, cost you, strengthened you, limited you, and defined you, the emotional response is natural, because you are finally evaluating it with full context instead of youthful optimism or defensive pride. There is less illusion now. There is more truth. And truth, even when calm, carries weight. It is important to recognize that this process does not mean you secretly want to undo your life, because most men at this stage do not actually want to erase their past, even if they feel a sting when remembering certain turns. The sting is not a demand for reversal. It is a sign of depth. You are no longer skimming the surface of your biography. You are reading it carefully. Earlier chapters feel different when you know roughly how thick the book will be, and that awareness naturally changes the emotional tone of each page, because you sense the narrative arc instead of only the immediate plot. Some men fear that this emotional intensity means they are becoming unstable or overly sensitive. That fear is understandable, but it is misplaced. What is happening is not collapse, it is recalibration. Your relationship with time is shifting from expansion to consolidation, and in consolidation, the mind reviews, sorts, and evaluates because it wants internal order before moving forward into the next stage of life. Order requires honesty. Honesty sometimes hurts, yet this hurt is different from despair. It is measured. It has edges. It often comes in quiet moments rather than dramatic crises, and it fades when you return to daily life, which shows that it is not a breakdown, but a reflective adjustment. Adjustment can feel heavy, but it is adaptive. You are becoming more aware of irreversibility. That awareness is sobering. When you understand that some doors are permanently closed, you feel their outline more clearly, and the mind briefly touches what might have been, not to torture you, but to map the full territory of your lived experience. Mapping requires contrast. Contrast produces emotion. There is dignity in this stage. There is seriousness. Earlier, speed protected you from depth. Now depth replaces speed. And depth means you can finally see that every decision, even the imperfect ones, contributed to the man who stands here today, carrying both strength and limitation in the same frame. That frame feels solid, even if it aches So when past decisions start to hurt after 45, it is not because you suddenly discovered mistakes that were invisible before, but because your perception of time has shifted from infinite runway to finite horizon. And that shift naturally magnifies the emotional weight of every turn you once took. The horizon changes the story, not the road itself. What you are feeling is the mind adapting to a new scale of time, a more realistic one, a more grounded one. And within that grounded awareness, the past becomes clearer, heavier, and more human, because it is no longer surrounded by endless possibility, but by lived reality and measured future. That clarity can sting, yet it is also maturity. Nothing is wrong with you. Your clock simply sounds different now, and when the sound changes, the echo of earlier choices becomes louder, not as accusation, but as proof that they mattered, that they shaped real years, and that those years were not empty space, but actual life. That realization carries weight, but it also carries truth. This is why it hurts, and this is why it makes sense.